And time for a visit from our books expert, Spencer Stuart. He drops by every month or so, talking about things to do with books. And when he dropped by this last week, I asked him what he was talking about today.
Well, since it's December and Christmas is on the mind, I thought we would talk about an Icelandic tradition that's connected with the book, known as the Jólabókaflóðið, which is it translates as the Yule book flood.
What does that mean, a book flood?
Now, it sort of starts in November. There's a book bulletin that's sent around to the population of Iceland, which is roughly about 300,000 people. And it announces all of the books, both translations and original Icelandic authors, for the year. And it connects to a tradition that takes place December 24th, in which people exchange gifts. They're always books. And they unwrap them and they sit down and they read them in the evening, usually after dinner. So, if you're wandering around Reykjavik on December 24th, chances are everyone's inside reading these books. And quite often it's new authors, right? So it's really sort of celebrating the literary culture of Iceland. So.
What an incredible tradition.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. It's the history of Iceland. The book is a long one. We know it as where the sagas come from and originate. But this tradition itself begins around the time that World War II is ramping up. And what happens is that there's basically limits on imports into the country, except for paper. And so what happens is during that period of roughly 1939 on into 1944, 45, basically the only thing that could be, exchanged at that time to celebrate Christmas was books.
Huh.
And after that, of course, in 1944, Iceland gains its independence from Denmark. And this tradition continues, and it becomes, really kicked into overdrive after that, because obviously literature can be really a catalyst and a vehicle for a national identity. And in 1955, Halldór Laxness wins the Nobel Prize. So this kind of amazing blossoming that happens after World War II and continues, to this day. Around 2006, I know that the Bókatíðindið, which is the book bulletin, carried between 750 to 800 books that were announced for that year alone.
In a population of about 300,000.
That's right. There's a number that's sort of tossed around by some world media that 1 in 10 people in Iceland publish a book in their life. Huh. That includes sort of self-publishing online, so it's a bit skewed. But there are a lot of publishers and authors that publish books in their lifetime. There's an expression which I won't try and say here, but it's the idea that you have a book in your belly, an idea that everyone can kind of write a story, and that there's indeed a community that is interested in reading it in the Icelandic community. So it's really kind of enriched this sense of identity, which is a really remarkable thing to observe. It's certainly a fascination for the rest of the world. And it keeps getting larger and larger. Indeed, in 2013, I know that an Icelandic university did a study of the population in terms of their how many books they read a year, and half the population, so 150,000. Just to put that in context, Reykjavik is 120,000 people in it, so it's more or less in and around the Reykjavik area and on the coasts. Within that half that population, people read about 8 books a year. Huh. Which is quite a good amount. It's a high rate of literacy for sure. And it's interesting to look at the history of print in Iceland. It's one that starts in the 1500s. 1580 is the first translation of the Bible into Icelandic. They then go on for about 200 years where they're basically the church controls the printing press, and there was only one that came from Sweden. But then in 1772, the king of Denmark allowed for another printing press to come in, and that's when you see a kind of blossoming of more secular-based, and actually and tales as well, more Icelandic-based tales start to disseminate into the population. And then from then on, you start to see a kind of lockstep connection between the emergence of of a national literature in Iceland and the continent of Europe. 1850 is considered to be the first Icelandic novels published, and there's a sort of very strong romantic movement that develops on into the 20th century. So it's something that really, it's in there already. It's already in the mix, but certainly, through a moment of real austerity, of not being able to exchange something, they really, they make best with what they have, and you see that in the Jólabókaflóðið.
Have you ever been there for it?
I have not. No. However, I've made my way over to Reykjavik in the spring, which is probably the best time maybe to be there. Although the weather was absolutely unpredictable at that point as well. And it's interesting. It was during a time that I was interviewing a number of rare booksellers in Europe, and it was the last stop on my trip. And I got a chance to actually sit down with Ari Gisli, who is the proprietor of what is considered the last rare bookstore in Iceland, and it is in downtown Reykjavik. It's a very, very interesting story. It starts with his father, Bragi Kristjánsson, which he came back from studying law in Denmark. He decided that really wasn't for him in 1960 at the age of 22. And he started up a bookstore in downtown Reykjavik with his wife, Nina Anedóttir. And she is also herself a celebrated poet and writer. And Ari grew up in that scenario. He came of age in the 80s, and as he was saying to me in our conversation, in the 1980s there were 15 rare bookstores in downtown Reykjavik and 8 in the surrounding on the island itself. They were biblio-mad, as they'd say, and that sort of slowly but surely changed. Indeed, the Jólabókaflóðið sort of connects more with new books, not so much the kind of older tradition. So his store is very much kind of an incubator or a place maybe to kind of keep the books for maybe a generation that will be interested in them again, which he truly sort of believes that will continue. And it's interesting to sort of look at his father's path and how Ari has sort of picked up on it. His father was one of the first booksellers to offer rare books internationally by talking to a Danish bookseller who had 50 clients that were interested in Icelandic books. But he also did a television show, a weekly piece on...
About rare books?
That's right, on book history, yeah. And he would dress, and he was a very, very snappy dresser. And he would just talk about books that he just got in that he was excited about. And so it was really kind of an amazing community. He was somewhat of a celebrity in Reykjavik.
What a world that is so immersed in the idea of books. It's quite delightful to think about.
It is. It's really nice. I walked away from speaking with him wondering, how did this all come to be on an island? And certainly the weather probably helps. I mean, this idea of it being cold outside and stormy, but to have a fire going and a book in a comfortable chair, it's quite a world. It's quite an image.
Spencer, thanks for coming in to talk about this.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Spencer Stuart is our books expert here on North by Northwest, and you can check out his website and actually read an article about the last rare bookstore in Iceland. Just do a bit of a search for Spencer W. Stuart, Stuart, spencerwstuart.ca, and I'll put that link on the Facebook page as well.